Hi, everybody. It is Monday, April 27th, and we are going to be talking about some human impacts on the environment today. There are many of them, so it's actually going to take us a week or two, possibly even three, to get through all the ones that I think are important enough that I want you guys to know about. So we'll talk about two of them this week. Our goals for today is we're going to start our notes entry on the human impact on the environment, and it's going to be an ongoing entry until we have gone through about 7 of the main negative impacts that we have. And number 2, your only homework for tonight is to submit a picture of your notes on the first 2 human impacts we're going to learn about. Okay, so as we are kind of thinking more about human impact on the environment, I just want to touch on the subtle difference between ecology versus environmental science. Remember, ecology was the study of organisms and their interaction with their own environment and each other. Environmental science is the study of the interaction between human activity, so all the things that we do to the earth, all the things that we use it for, and how that affects the biosphere itself and those ecosystems that we've been learning about. Because quite honestly, humans do not play the hunter-gatherer role that we once played. We're not necessarily living survival of the fittest as when we originally evolved we were. So we're a bit separate in that regard. And that's why environmental science is more looking at our human impacts on the environment. Okay, so if we're talking about planet Earth, we depend on the Earth for everything, for food, water, air, shelter, all of our resources, everything. Humans are the only species that have the ability to understand, to manipulate, and frankly, to damage Earth's ecosystems. So at the end of the day, we're responsible for pretty much all the negative environmental issues that we're having right now. Now, on planet Earth, humans, we're not the only species, as you well know. There are millions of species. However, we act like we're the only species at times. We and our actions have the ability to change, and we do change local and global environments. The most significant source of negative environmental change, look in the mirror because it's all of us. Okay? Now, that's important to note because we can't change something if we don't honestly admit to ourselves what the cause of the problem is, and that is human action. Okay? So now, having said that, we're also going to talk about some ways that we can move past this and have less of an impact on our environment. Now, there's 2 issues that are really magnifying, especially now, magnifying our actions on the environment. Overpopulation, which you guys know we've talked about, a variety of times the last couple weeks. We said human population is on that nice, well, not so nice, I should say, that J curve, okay? And that J curve or exponential curve is not sustainable, okay? Also, our wants versus our needs in these modern times. Our needs, used to be very basic, right? Food, water, shelter. All we wanted to do was survive. But as, technology and farming and agriculture and medicine, all these things we have had advances in, our needs are met. And we have a lot of time on our hands that we're not meeting our needs. So this is where our wants start to come into play. And our wants, as you can see in this little model, are ever growing. And that's something that we really need to take stock of. Now, there's a term called ecological overshoot, and I really want you to be familiar with this because right now we are on a path to basically encounter ecological overshoot probably within, I don't know, your children's lifetime. However, I will say it depends on whose numbers you're listening to. Some environmentalists think we're already far along this path. Some politicians and some other people think, no, there's tons and tons of more room and time to grow. So it's really hard to put an exact number or year on when this is going to happen. I don't think anyone would argue, though, that we're not on the path for this. Just how far along is what they argue. But basically, if we look at our diagram here, we have our population growth here, okay? And along with population growth increasing, our consumption is going to increase. Okay, so that's kind of one in the same line. Now, our carrying capacity is the dotted line, and we know the carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that an ecosystem can support. However, once we get beyond the carrying capacity, and you would think, why can we do that? Well, we have the ability, again, with our technology, to store a lot of resources for future use. So the only reason humans are actually able to so greatly exceed the carrying capacity is because at this point we're relying on stored resources. We call this point where we are above carrying capacity overshoot. Now, eventually those stored resources are going to run out and our population is going to greatly decline. However, because we have so degraded the environment at this point, our carrying capacity, instead of staying in this nice, stable dotted line, the overall carrying capacity of the Earth is also going to decrease. And then when all is said and done, we're going to have less long-term carrying capacity than we did before the overshoot began. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our notes entry, human impact on the environment. Our focus is, what impact does human activity have on the biosphere? Let's take a definition for environmental science, the study of the interaction between human activity and the biosphere. We talked about ecological footprint last week, so let's just get a definition formally in our notes for that. Ecological footprint, we said, is the impact of a person on the environment expressed as the amount of land required to sustain their use of natural resources. And as we said last week, US citizens are the number one placeholder for the largest ecological footprint. Not really something I want to be well known for, but I'm right there with the rest of you. This is the world we grew up in. Doesn't mean it's, the world we have to accept without change, right? Okay. I'd like you to put that humans, underline, highlight, are the primary source of environmental harm. And as we just said, overpopulation and this idea of wants versus needs are amplifying human impact on the environment. Every day, as these two things increase, the magnitude of our actions on the environment is also increasing. And then go ahead and put a definition for population overshoot. Population overshoot occurs when a population exceeds carrying capacity. As the stored resources are depleted, it will then enter a crash, and that's the formal term for it. The crash is where, the downward slope of the consumption and the downward slope of the carrying capacity. The ecosystem becomes so degraded that the overall carrying capacity decreases for the long term. I do want you to make a quick, simple sketch like this one of population overshoot. We're going to have consumption, or you really could have population even, on the y-axis. We're going to have time on the x-axis. A nice dotted line is going to be our carrying capacity, okay? But remember, there's a reason that there's thick dashes and thin dashes. Thin dashes are where it should continue on to be, but it actually doesn't, because as the consumption or population rises into overshoot, that's going to cause our carrying capacity to also start tailing downward. And this is the difference between the original carrying capacity and the now degraded carrying capacity. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. The challenge faced by humans today is, how do we maintain a standard of living that is acceptable for us while controlling the harmful effects that we have on global ecosystems? This is what environmental science is all about. This is what environmental engineers are helping to solve. And again, these are not easy problems to tackle. Please recall, remember we talked about energy, my goodness, way back in the fall/winter. We said renewable resources are resources that are either inexhaustible, like sunlight, or the ones that can regenerate and replenish if they're properly managed, like something like trees. Non-renewable resources, on the other hand, are resources that once they're depleted, they're going to be gone forever. And those are going to be our fossil fuels, our nuclear energy, etc. Now, sustainable development. This is something that we want to always keep in the back of our mind, because as we hear these concerning things about human impact on the environment, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's this idea of sustainable development and sustainable design that can ideally meet human wants and needs in a way that maintains all of our resources for the long term. So it's the process of using natural resources without depleting them. It protects the quality and quantity of renewable resources such as land, forest, fisheries, air, and fresh water. Let's go ahead and add sustainable development into our notes. Again, the process of using natural resources without depleting them. It meets human needs without causing environmental harm. This should be the goal of really every human in the modern age. Easier said than done, though, okay? Now, the human impacts on the environment we are going to be looking at are deforestation, desertification, acid rain, ozone depletion, global warming, climate change, ocean acidification, and loss of biodiversity. These are, that should say 8, I apologize. These are the kind of top 8 that I want you to be familiar with. I know you hear a lot about global warming and climate change. Some people think those are one and the same. They are not, and I'm hoping that by the end of this unit, you'll have a really good handle on the differences between them. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about deforestation and desertification. So our forest resources, they not only provide essential resources for humans, they also have an essential role in ecosystems, as you know. Okay, that's probably even a more important role than just use for us. Deforestation is defined as the loss of forest by clear cutting. So this is one I guarantee you've heard of. Most of you probably didn't even need a formal definition for that. With a growing population and the growing wants and needs of us, we need space to live, right? So that's one reason we're going to clear cut some things. If you're thinking about just space in general, back, long ago, we had just you, okay? Then maybe a couple centuries later, a couple thousand years later, you and your hut and maybe your family and a goat or something if you're lucky, right? Then we had you and your small little, cabin. Maybe you had a bicycle, well water. Nowadays, though, we're talking about you and your big old house and your multiple vehicles and your pool if you're lucky and your big yard. So each one of us, there's many more of us, and each one of us is now taking up more space than ever. Average home sizes from 1950 to today. In 1950, less than 1,000 square feet in a house, and everyone was content, amazingly, right? This only goes up to 2009, which was on average 2,700 square feet per home. Now in 2019, 2020, it is closer to 3,000, okay? And again, wants versus needs. Another reason that we cut down forests, in addition to just making space for us to live, is that we need the wood to make products, from homes to paper products. And in some parts of the world, wood is still the fuel that they use for heating and cooking. So this is another reason that deforestation continues to happen. Now, in addition to just serving our human needs, ecologically, the forests play an even greater role in, in helping everything on the earth. The photosynthetic plants, they remove CO2 and they provide us with oxygen. They also synthesize glucose, which you guys know is the basis of the entire food chain, the entire food web. The forests provide habitats for many, many organisms. So when we clear cut these, we're getting rid of their abilities to remove carbon dioxide and replace it with oxygen. We're getting rid of the basis of the food chain in parts of the world. We're also getting rid of habitats for many, many different species. And lastly, a lot of people don't realize the forests help to moderate the climate. So we're causing more and more climate instability locally as forests are clear cut.